Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. It's such a perfect place for me to be this morning. And I felt something so comforting and inspiring just walking in. So I'm extremely grateful to be here. This is a home base for me, as I'm sure you all know, on a spiritual level. And so the conversation, going on in my soul that has brought me to this place that I'm having within myself and hopefully with the American people right now is one that I know that this is a room which understands. I'm a student of A Course in Miracles. How many of you are students of A Course in Miracles? So as we know, there's one truth spoken in many different ways. A Course in Miracles is a statement of universal spiritual themes, certainly the unity principles. We know it's all one big metaphysical truth. But I want to begin by talking about a particular principle in the Course, which we all know. And that is that there is the world of truth and there's the world of illusion. And the world of truth is a world of ideas. And it is the world of pure love, because the Course in Miracles says, love is the mind of God. And then there's the realm of the illusion. And the realm of the illusion is materiality. And all materiality, we're taught, emerges from human thought. And when materiality is an expression of love, peace, harmony, etc., it is a consequence or an effect of thought that was loving, which is a co-creation with God. So when we align our thoughts with God, we co-create with God. We co-create by thinking love, and we give birth to loving manifestation. The Course in Miracles says that any manifestation or effect on the material plane that is not loving is a consequence of our having thought without God, or what the Course in Miracles would call the separation. And the atonement is the correction of our perception. Because when we rethink, that is the miracle. So that we go from thinking that is not loving to thinking that is loving, and that alone changes the realm of effect. Now, the Course in Miracles says one is real, one is not real, but that the realm of illusion, even when it is not loving, although it is not eternal reality, it feels at the time as much like eternal reality does, because since we're living in this three-dimensional reality, the three-dimensional reality feels even more real to us. Now, there are some people who read the Course in Miracles, although it seems to me, if you come up with what I'm about to say, you didn't read the whole book. There's a lot of opening it somewhere, right? So some people say, if you're looking at the realm of materiality and it's not loving, you're just supposed to ignore that. That's not what the Course in Miracles says. The Course in Miracles talks about positive denial and negative denial. If you just look at the realm of dense materiality and you say, well, that's not loving, therefore it's not real, therefore I'm supposed to ignore it, there's nothing miraculous about that. It's a convenient way to get off the hook and not have to address anybody's suffering. It's not transcendence, it's negative denial. The Course in Miracles talks about positive denial. And that's where, oh, you look, and you deny its power over you. You see it, you're not stupid, and you deny its ultimate power because since it is not a product of God, you know it has no real power. But what it takes to look at it and deny its power is way different than, oh, I'm just not going to look at it and it will go away. I mean, I hear a lot of that these days, you know, don't look at it, that'll give it power. Can you imagine your oncologist saying, it's only stage 1 cancer. It's so negative to look at it, let's just not focus on it. Is that what your oncologist would say? Some things grow in power because we do not look at them. So the Course in Miracles talks about God's plan. How are we going to heal the world? How are we going to heal those negative manifestations, those loveless manifestations? So the Course in Miracles says the loveless manifestation is just the effect, the cause of which is the cause, But if you say, I'm just going to stay over here in the realm of cause and I'm not going to address the effect, that's like the doctor. You go to the doctor and you have a broken elbow and the doctor asks to see your knee. So the Course in Miracles says God has a plan, and it is a plan of the teachers of God. The Course in Miracles says, who are the teachers of God? Anyone who chooses to be one. They are those who have heard the call. They come from all religions and from no religions. And the Course in Miracles says that the line, many are called but few are chosen, means everyone is called but few care to listen. So the plan of the teachers of God, the Course in Miracles says, is that God does send his teachers into the realm of illusion. You don't avoid the illusion, you are sent into the illusion in the place where God directs you, where the voice of the Holy Spirit directs you, in order, the Course in Miracles says, to be the presence of the alternative. So I have always, as many of you know, been interested in politics. I have never thought that it was the realm of the ultimate solution to the world's problems, because as a Course in Miracles student, I know it's just a manifestation. But as a Course in Miracles student, and whether we're Course in Miracles students or any spiritual practice, we know the issue is not only to be love on this planet, but to express love in practical ways, how we are directed, how we are assigned. A girl asked me yesterday, a young woman asked me in an event. She said, what part of the healing of the world, how can one person make a difference? How do I know what to do? I said, what's your passion? She said, education. I said, there's your answer. You are on the earth to help there. Somebody else has a passion for the arts. That you're on this earth to help there. Somebody else has a passion for business. You're on the earth to help there. So these are all things that are elements of the illusion, but the Course in Miracles says that we are sent into the illusion to hold a space that is a different space than the thoughts of fear that dominate it, because in the presence of light, darkness cannot stand. Now, you might have heard me say, however ineptly, at the debate the other night, telling President Trump that he has harnessed fear for political purposes, and I'm going to harness love for political purposes. So I'd like to talk to you, my spiritual, what the Course in Miracles would call mighty companions. Exactly what I mean by that. There are thoughts. We all have different kinds of thoughts. We have some evolved loving thoughts, and we have unevolved unloving thoughts. And that is true of all of us, I'm sure. And until and unless we're an enlightened master, we all have thoughts that we're proud of and thoughts that maybe we're not proud of. And we all know, as spiritual practitioners and students, that the spiritual path is not about thinking we're perfect. It's about knowing we are at choice. I can be wounded, but I still have, the choice is mine whether or not to act from the wound. So a lot of times spirituality is not where I've yet healed in a place, but where I make a choice not to endlessly talk about it, or not to act from it, or not to get angry about it, not to get defensive. It's a process. And that's very important, because we live in a world today where we have an odd idea of what authenticity means. As though if it's what I really feel, there's something cool about saying it. Well, that's not necessarily true at all. Because I might say, I am honestly angry at this moment. But the Course in Miracles would tell me, but your anger is not the real you. Your anger is an expression of the wounded you. You can choose at this moment. You're going to be honest about your anger with yourself, but you have a choice. The real you, Marianne, is not angry. The real you, however, is being obscured right now by the anger, which is a product of your woundedness. Okay. Same is true of a nation. A country is just a collection of people. Now, I don't think any intelligent observer thought that the United States of America was a place where there were no racists, no bigots, no anti-Semites, no homophobes, no Islamophobes, no xenophobes. Nobody intelligent thought that. We're not an evolved, enlightened group of people entirely. But we had reached a point in our society where there was a consensus that you don't want to be that, you shouldn't be that. And so there was a consensus until fairly recently that we had reached on both the left and the right that no, decent people don't go there. Wasn't that any of us never thought we had judgmental thoughts or that we didn't think those people existed who would really express them, but there were lines of decency that we agreed to as a society. And we thought we had reached the point where there were these strong levees that would hold. And for a while they did, particularly after the civil rights movement. There was a sense you weren't going to hear major racist talk or bigoted talk or anti-Semitic talk or homophobic talk from either Republican or Democratic, left or right. We thought we reached a point where there was an agreement of decency and dignity. And those levees have fallen. And there are a lot of reasons why those levees fell. One of them has to do with social media. With social media, anybody can say anything. They can have an equal megaphone to anyone else, right? They can hide. Secondly, I think, is this false view of authenticity. This false view that if I feel it, there's something good about saying it, as though that's an inherent good because it's my honest feeling in that moment. And third, there is someone who saw a great political potential in those forces. Jared Kushner actually wrote, it was an interview I read with Jared Kushner, where he said that I think he said he was in a McDonald's with his father-in-law, which I thought was odd. And he said to his father-in-law, there are a lot of angry people out there. And we could harness that. I don't think his word was harness. But basically he said, there are a lot of really angry people out there. Man, there's so many of those. We could probably make you president. Which is, if you think about it, really something. And particularly if you think about that with any view of human history. Because not only in the past, but also in the present, there are few things socially, politically, and historically more dangerous than a charismatic personality who can harness the power of negativity and rage and fear. Now, we haven't had that happen here before. We have had, I remember when I was younger, many of you will remember this because some of you younger know this name, but those of you older know how different it is. How many of you know the name David Duke? Okay. Remember several years ago, David Duke arose and there was a collective shudder of horror on the left and on the right. Republicans and Democrats. No way. This man is way too out there. Remember? He came around this cycle and he was considered a reasonable candidate and support of the president. Do you remember? We know what the metaphysics are. We know that love is to fear what light is to dark. We know that in the presence of love, fear cannot stand. And we know that the only way then that you can defeat dog whistles, because that's how this kind of political force is promulgated, through dog whistles, through code. Every black person knows the code of racism. I'm a Jew. Every Jew knows the code for anti-Semitism. Women know the code for misogyny. Certain things people say. And we know what you're really saying. Now, when you have an entire political force field that results from dog whistles, we also know as spiritual seekers, you can't use force against that. The only way to override dog whistles is by drowning them out with angel voices. Now, Abraham Lincoln, when Abraham Lincoln spoke of the angels of our better nature, he didn't think he was being metaphorical, because it was before the advent of modern psychology. So if it was 200 years ago and someone said something like a word or phrase, sentence or view that you and I now would identify as racism, bigotry, anti-Semitism, homophobia, Islamophobia, or whatever, people 200 years ago would have said, oh, demons. And if you were to say 200 years ago something that we would identify today, love, mercy, compassion, non-judgment, tolerance, kindness, understanding, people 200 years ago would have said, angels. And I think a lot of us have started to question modern psychotherapy, all the thinking that we thought we evolved beyond was perhaps wiser than we are now. And so when he said we need the angels of our better nature, Lincoln was simply saying the better aspects of our character. Because a nation chooses, just like an individual. You choose. You're not saying you're perfect and you have no unloving thoughts, but you choose what to say. You choose how to behave. That agency is everything. That is maturity. It is psychological maturity, it is emotional maturity, and it is spiritual maturity. In AA, they say you can act yourself into a new way of thinking more easily than you can think yourself into a new way of acting. There's too much, well, I'm going to work on it, 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 like as though that will get you there. And what I've learned in my life is, no, you make a decision, Marianne. The fact that you still feel it is not an excuse. That's called maturity. That's called adulthood. So what's happening in our society is that people with racist views, bigoted views, anti-Semitic views, Islamic views, Islamophobic views, all of those things, it's not like they're anywhere near the majority of Americans. Far more Americans love than hate. I think far more people in the world love than hate. But what has happened is that those who hate have become strategic, they have become organized, they have become politicized, and they have become effective. Now, this is a line in the Course in Miracles that relates to this. Conviction. Conviction is a force multiplier. So the Course in Miracles says miracles arise from conviction, and so does evil. Because conviction, when we say in the Lord's Prayer, on earth as it is in heaven, that's what unity is. It's an affirmation. It's the power of the mind. You affirm the good. Well, it's really important. Those who do evil affirm evil. So the problem is not that there are more haters than lovers in America, anywhere near than that. But the haters have become active in the public square. Now, many of you probably know my career. I've been in this community for years. And I've always said that those of us who practice the principles of metaphysics, unity, A Course in Miracles, etc., I've always thought we are the last people who should be standing on the sidelines when it comes to political, social, and economic issues. I've always felt we should be the biggest grown-ups in the room. Because if you know what changes one heart, if you know what changes the world, you're the one who has a clue. And this community, and I know many of you know my work enough to know I have been saying for a long time that I was uncomfortable with the fact that the higher consciousness community has in too many ways, in too many cases, contributed not to a lack of conversation about goodness, because God knows. Unity, Course in Miracles, all of this. We have been major contributors to the conversation of goodness, conversation of love, conversation of transformation, conversation of forgiveness, but have contributed to this trend in America over the last several decades of taking the conversation about goodness and conscience and transformation and circumscribing it only within the domain of the personal self. It's not like any of us stopped asking, and this is not just about unity, this is about America. I don't think Americans lack deep questioning about what it means to be a good life. But we have stopped asking what it means to be a good country. And we can't be great if we're not good, Mr. President. We have stopped asking the questions about our country that we routinely ask in our personal lives. There is morality. There's private morality. This is what morality is. Is that the right thing to do? That's all morality is. Asking yourself, well, is that really the right thing to do? And it's not like we don't ask it about ourselves. We need to ask that about taxes. Is that right? To make it so much easier for those who already have a lot to make more and harder for everybody else to even make it. Is that right? Is it good? Is foreign policy that is based more on selling arms than on asking yourself, do we really want to be supporting a genocidal war that's killing people in Yemen for the sake of an arms deal? Is that right? We need to be asking ourselves whether or not if millions and millions of American children who go to school every day in the richest country in the world, where there aren't even enough school supplies to teach a child to read, and if the child cannot read by the age of 8, the chances of that child graduating from high school are drastically reduced, and the chance of the child incarcerated someday is drastically increased. Is that right? Is that good? And there's been so much apoliticalization in the name of spirituality that, I'm sorry, is nothing spiritual whatsoever. There's nothing holy about complacency. And there's nothing negative about yelling fire if, in fact, the house is burning down. And there is no serious spiritual or religious tradition that gives any of us a pass on addressing the suffering of other sentient beings. We know the answer is love, but it can't just be love for our own children. The love that saves the world is not just that you love your children, I love my children, or because you're basically like me and in my tribe, I love your children too. The love that will save the world is love that is just as great for children on the other side of the town, the other side of the country, and the other side of the world, because that is how God loves. And the Course in Miracles tells us we are here to learn to think as God thinks. Now, I went the other day, the day after the debate, I went to Homestead, Florida, to the detainment facility there. And I want to tell you about what I saw. At Homestead, at this detention facility, there are about 2,700 to 3,000 young people. This is a profit-making detention center where we are paying, that's you and me, $775 each day for each child. And these children, as we know, have been separated from their parents. There are so many people ready to take them. Their families are waiting on the other side, nonprofit groups, church groups. And just in case anyone has any question about this, I want to say something that I think is very important because it's an area of propaganda that's extremely important. One of the issues of propaganda is, well, there are sex traffickers bringing in some of these kids. And actually there are. But there are professionals within the police agencies there at these border entries who are skilled at vetting just that. In order to do so, they have to have the child with the adults. Because that's when they say something like, really, how long have you known your uncle? What's her favorite color? That's how they vet these things. So if you're trying to find out who the sex traffickers are and which children are being sex trafficked, you don't separate the kids from the adult, because those particular vetting agents, that's what these professionals are, have to be there with the child and the adult because they know what to look for and they know what questions to ask. So this has nothing to do with that. This is a purposely, and I know this is difficult for Americans. I think we're in a lot of denial about this because we've never had this. We were all raised, that doesn't happen here. This is a purposely created policy to send a message to people in other parts of the world, don't even think about it. And they want it to be loud, and they want it to be cruel, and they want it to be this dastardly in order to keep people from doing it. But I want to tell you the good news. Because when you go to Homestead, when you go to the detainment center, you can't go in. Even the politicians aren't allowed in, which is just a large part of what's going on that's so terrible. Because in our prisons, and most of us would say the standards at our prisons aren't high enough for how people are treated. But at these private detainment centers, there are no standards. They're private. Now, you can't go in, but you stand up on a ladder and you can see over. And all I could see, of course, were, kids in line walking, these young men, etc. But what I want to tell you about is what I saw on this side of the ladder. Because that policy is an expression of a politics of fear. But what I saw on this side of the ladder was a politics of love. Dr. Martin Luther King talked about how the civil rights movement would be successful because of what he called a coalition of conscience. I was in Homestead, Florida, where it's hot. It was very hot and very humid. And there were people outside that place who go every single day. There's one group called Witness Homestead. And we know that the night before the crucifixion, when the disciples were falling asleep, and of course, if you only hear that story and you only look at it with the outer eye, they were falling asleep because it was late at night. When you look at it with the inner eye, you realize the disciples were falling asleep because it was too painful to be awake for the moment and knowing what would happen the next day. Jesus said to the disciples, "Can you not remain awake with me in the hour of my agony, to bear witness to the agony of others?" That right there, according to Mahatma Gandhi, is soul force. And that's what all those people outside Homestead, all those people outside the detainment centers in Texas, they are simply there every day to bear witness. And when you go up on the ladder, somebody gave me, you can see it on my Instagram and on my social media, these big red hearts. They're there just so that if the kids look up, they can't see mommy, they can't see daddy, but so that they will see a heart that says somebody cares and somebody loves you. And even though there are people from all over the country and all over the world, they're bringing blankets, they're bringing everything. No, nothing's allowed in. So for me, what I was impacted by at Homestead was not just what I saw and what I was informed about going on inside, but what I saw and what I was informed of inside on this side of the fence, that we are good people. And this stuff will not stand. And that is what a politics of love is. And if you are a Republican or you are a Trump supporter, listen, this is America. We don't all have to agree. That's what a free society is. But I would hope that if you're a Trump supporter and you're a Republican, you are even more on this than anyone else. We must not be willing to acquiesce to things that we know are wrong in our hearts just because it's our political party. We should not be willing to acquiesce to something we know is wrong if it's our country. That's not what patriotism is. We must always be willing. And Elie Wiesel said we must never be neutral. Neutrality always serves the oppressor and never the oppressed. Abolitionist movement did not emerge from the government. The women's suffrage movement did not emerge from the government. The civil rights movement did not emerge from the government. Real social change does not emerge from the government. It emerges from the people. And you know where the abolitionist movement emerged from? The early evangelicals. It was people of conscience. People of conscience. It was the early evangelicals and the Quakers who created the abolitionist movement. And it's not an accident also that many of the women who led the women's suffragette movement were Quakers. Because essential to Quakerism is the idea of the divine light that is equal within every man, woman, and child. And let's not forget, Dr. King was a Baptist preacher. The Southern Christian Leadership Conference. So every time there has been a major shift, every time there has been a swerve from the American heart, American conscience, from democracy, let us not be so naive as to think, well, that doesn't happen here. Of course it has happened here. We had slavery in this country. We had genocide and cultural annihilation of Native Americans in this country. We've had oppression of women in this country. We have had institutionalized white supremacy and segregation in this country. We shouldn't, like I said, ladies and gentlemen, those of us who are in the spiritual realm, we should be the biggest grown-ups. We shouldn't go into this naive la-la stuff we don't do about personal lives. We're the crowd that knows about boundaries. We're the crowd that knows there are sociopaths out there. We're the crowd that was first reading Sociopath Next Door. We're the crowd that understands some people have no conscience. Some people have no remorse. It's a personal pathology. Let's stop pretending that doesn't exist on a collective basis, because it does. We should be the first people standing in standing firm that this shall not stand. If we're going to have a boundary and say we will not, is there anybody in this room who would say to a woman, if a woman walks in to a Unity church, says my husband is abusing me, this is not a place where we would ever tell a woman to go back to the abuser. Ever. We would say, no, you have a boundary, you have a line, the abuser shall not enter here. So we have to grow up. Sometimes governments can perpetrate abusive behavior as well. And when those children, this is, if you kidnap a child, if you're forcibly separating a child from their parents, what do we call that? What is that if not kidnapping? And if your government does it, that does not make it not kidnapping. That's called a state-sponsored crime. And if you are removing large groups of children, and let's not forget, seeking asylum is not a crime. Seeking asylum is not a crime. It's a statutory right. I think a lot of Americans, this is what happens when we don't teach our kids history. Ronald Reagan gave 8 million people, undocumented people, amnesty. Until 1973, if you were undocumented, all you had to do was walk into a registry office. I'm a Jew. I know what happens and how dangerous it is when a group of people is demonized and all these lies are told about a group of people and it's used as an excuse. This is big, big, big stuff, ladies and gentlemen. And when you take groups of children, these children separated from their parents, and like I said, if there's some that are brought in by sex traffickers, which there might be, the last thing you do is put them over there. We have systems of vetting. And like I said, it's people who are skilled in asking the kind of questions to say, I don't buy it. And we do need to deal with those people. But there are ways to deal with those people, and this is not the way you do that. So we're inflicting intentional trauma. Now, you might say, when some of them say, oh, the conditions are nice. I think in some of the places, I'm sure the conditions are nice enough. In other ones, we have enough reports of knowing that the conditions are anything but nice. But even in the issue of where the quote-unquote conditions are nice, what are we doing to these children, and what are we doing to these parents? And there even have rules inside where no child is allowed to touch any other child. No child is allowed. And I understand negative, oh, we have to be careful that there's not molestation or something, but that means no child is allowed to comfort any other child. Even your brother and sister, even if you're siblings, you cannot touch another child. So if you're there and you're a 10-year-old and your little 2-year-old sister is there, you can't hold your sister. This is chronic trauma that we are inflicting and perpetrating upon these children. And who knows, we might say, well, they'll be out in 90 days. Who knows? And then how is that going to affect them? And let me tell you something else about our community. Our community, more than any community, is so sensitive to our own childhood drama. Enough with our childhood drama. What about the drama and the childhood drama that makes our childhood drama look small? So the beauty to me, like I said, is what was happening on this side. There were politicians there. There was the ACLU there. There were political groups there. There were human justice groups there. There were church groups there. There were religious groups there. There were just people of conscience. There's the crucifixion, and then there's the resurrection. But both must be willed. The crucifixion is the denial and the invalidation and the effort to destroy love. And the crucifixion takes collective form, and it takes individual form. The Course in Miracles says God's will has never not been done. So that 3 days between the crucifixion and the resurrection, that's where you and I have a choice. Love is going to prevail here. What we have is the choice. How long is it going to take? And how much human suffering is going to occur before it does? The Course in Miracles says it's not up to you what you learn. It's simply up to you whether you learn through joy or through pain. We're going to get to love. But ladies and gentlemen, we're metaphysicians. Every action has a reaction. And if you are an individual and you're not acting with love, there's going to be a consequence. And we have this denial and grandiosity, which is all the courses the ego is made of, about our country, that somehow we're not going to experience the effects of this. We as citizens must will the resurrection now. And how do we do that? From a spiritual perspective, just make yourself available. And you pray, where would you have me go? What would you have me do? What would you have me say? And to whom? The Course in Miracles prayer says, I'm only here to be truly helpful. I do not have to think about what to say or what to do, for he who sent me shall guide my steps and my words. And it's time for us, I believe, to see citizenship now as an aspect of what it means to live a meaningful and a dignified and, yes, a spiritually infused life. So as you rise up in your life and you ask not only what should I do as a husband, as a wife, as a lover, as a friend, as an employer, as an employee, as a father, a mother, a child, a sister, a brother, let us also ask, what do I do as a citizen? I personally got a surprising answer. Run for president. Thank you very much. Thank you.